started by wiring the transmitter board as shown here. However, partway through programming I realized that two of the wires were offset slightly. The correct alignment is shown here. And then I just inserted the joystick into the board as shown in this picture. The next step was to wire the main robot as a receiver. This was much easier with only two wires to connect. DO goes to pin 9 and DI goes to pin 8. After that I was ready to begin programming the transmitter for the remote. In the beginning I just threw in some basic variables because I wasn't entirely sure what I needed. However, after looking at documentation for the various libraries and pieces, I was able to nail down the right variables to use. Converter so I could read the joystick. I just copied the code in directly from the documentation. The obvious next step was to read one axis of the joystick to make sure it worked. This is where I spent way too long trying to figure out why the code wasn't working before I realized it was the wiring mistake I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The joystick worked. I printed its raw value directly to the terminal. You can't see this, but the value does not update when I move the joystick. This is where I discovered there was a typo in the documentation. In some places it lists the commands as starting with ADC, and in other places it just uses AD. After some testing, I figured out that it was the latter in all cases. Unable to read the joystick, I will just skip ahead to where I realize that it's the wiring and fix that. Now that that's fixed, I can begin the process of encoding the values so I can send both the X and Y joystick positions as a single byte. I do this by converting each one into a single-digit value from 0 to 9, although this needs to be tweaked later. After that, I simply make sure the axes are labeled correctly and repeat the process for the y-axis. Value being only a single digit, I was able to store them both in a single byte with room to spare, with clever use of some very basic elementary school math. course, this approach allowed me to use any boundary I wanted, but 10 made it a lot easier to debug and troubleshoot since each digit was completely independent. Now that everything's set up and I'm encoding my values properly, I'm able to start transmitting them over the wireless antenna module. Working, I can begin programming the main robot to drive around under human control. I begin by trying to read the values I send from the remote. This takes a lot of debugging, but I do get it working eventually. At this point, everything appears to be working, but it's just reading garbage data. Eventually, I figure out that my serial library uses its own data structure, not just a basic pointer. At this point, it's really clear that something's acting up, as I'm only supposed to be receiving 1 or 2 digit values. I spend a lot of time playing around with my remote program trying to figure out why that isn't working before I realize that it is, and I just need to use a different data type for my serial communication. I will cut most of that out since I don't substantially change anything about how it works. One thing that I do change, however, is restricting the digits used from 0 to 9 down to 0 to 8. This keeps things within the printable ASCII range, so I don't break things by trying to use non-printing characters for other data. I also calibrate it to send 44 as the center instead of 43. This just makes the decoding math a little bit easier since I don't have to keep track of a different offset for each axis. And then I just make sure my values don't extend beyond the printable ASCII range. Again, that's just to make sure I don't break things by sending control characters. This is looking quite a bit better, but still not right. I'm pretty sure I fixed the problem soon after this check, though. Around this point, I realized that the setup could double as a really bad keyboard for consoles. didn't record the first run, but everything worked except that both axes were inverted. This was one of the easiest fixes in the project.
This was a triumph. I'm making a note here, huge success. It's hard to overstate my satisfaction.